What's wrong with you people? I'm serious.
Not asking, how do I feel about this, or how can I intellectually rationalize this, or what do the studies show? Ultimately we're asking the question of what does the Bible say? It's a specific attack against the true God. Because when's the last time you heard someone stub their toe and go, "Oh, Buddha"? It doesn't happen.
Jesus wants the rose! That's the point of the gospel!
Oh, yes, and we are live. What's up, guys? Welcome to a special extra late night adventure.
extra late.
Extra late episode of Worldview Warriors. I'm Dave Wilson, hanging out with the ever so succulent John Jansen, and we are here to party.
Vivacious last time? I didn't remember what it was. It's voluptuous is what you said last time. I don't know where you're getting this.
It's late, man.
It is late.
It's good stuff. Well, anyway, what's up, guys? Welcome to the show. We're here to talk about Easter and the alleged pagan origins thereof.
We've kind of become the holiday warriors in a bit.
Unintentionally, So
is this our fifth video on holidays?
No, I think third.
We did Thanksgiving, Halloween, Christmas.
Fourth.
I feel like we did one other one.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I think we did, but whatever. Thank you guys for watching this live. I wonder what kind of crowd. Will we get a different crowd since we're so late at night? I don't know, man. This is wild. We're in uncharted territories. Anyway, thank you for checking out this video. Thank you to everybody watching live. Feel free to comment, like, whatever, kind of as you're following along. And thanks to everybody checking us out after the fact or on YouTube.
Definitely.
So what are we talking about today, John? We're talking about Easter.
Yeah, so this time of the year, there's debated among certain Christians about whether or not we should celebrate it. And a lot of that is spurred on by a meme that has become very common across Christian communities.
A lot of memes.
A lot of memes, actually. But the claim is that Easter is a celebration of a pagan goddess who was celebrated by pagans for fertility that had to deal with temple prostitution, child sacrifice, and then dyeing the eggs in the children's blood. So a pretty morbid, pretty whack, definitely pretty whack. And that goddess is known as Ishtar, but the claim on the main meme that you're going to see in a little bit is that it's pronounced Easter. And so why is it a big deal, and what's the actual history behind it?
Well, yeah, and I think, basically, again, what the claim is that there was this big pagan festival, and then when Christianity spread sort of across Europe, they basically just Christianized. They took these pagan festivals and then just renamed them or kind of repurposed these horrible pagan things. We've got... Here, let me get the meme pulled up here, because we have got it here. And this is an interesting one. Okay. So yeah, this is Ishtar, pronounced Easter. It says, Easter was originally a celebration of Ishtar, the Assyrian Babylonian goddess of fertility and sex. Her symbols, like the egg and the bunny, were and are still are fertility and sex symbols. Or did you think eggs and bunnies had anything to do with the resurrection? After Constantine decided to Christianize the empire, Easter was changed to represent Jesus, but at its roots, Easter is pagan and about celebrating fertility and sex. So that's quite a claim. Easter. Woo, that's quite a claim. All right, let's bring this back up here. So why is it a big deal? God has prescribed a certain way for us to worship Him, and God takes worship seriously. But unfortunately, there is a lot of this type of thing going on. So we're, like we said before, this is going to be a brief video, much shorter than some of the other ones that we're going to do. But let's take a look a little bit at the actual history of how Easter came about as a holiday. Let's see here. So we have as early as AD 190, Eusebius, who is a church historian, writes about how there were some various disputes of when to celebrate the resurrection of Jesus. So traditionally, we know that Jesus was crucified and resurrected at the time of Passover. But the problem is Passover isn't always at the same time every year. So it's not like Christmas where it's like, every day, December 25th, this is when we're doing it. When the Passover was calculated from Leviticus, I think it's 23, but that was sort of a lot of things that kind of lined up around more of a lunar calendar that the Jews held. And what had sort of happened was the calendars changed as people changed. Rome brought in a different calendar, a more efficient calendar, and everybody kind of went by that. So there were some disputes of how that was settled as to when we would celebrate the resurrection. And obviously we should celebrate the resurrection every day, especially every Sunday. Shoot, that's why we go to church on Sunday, because that's the day that Christ rose from the dead. But so again, Eusebius writes that there was some dispute as early as AD 190 about when we should celebrate this. And essentially what happened is one of the things that was determined by the church at the Council of Nicaea in 325, one of the things that they decided was really when we should celebrate Easter. Or it wasn't called Easter back then, but when we should celebrate the resurrection of Christ. And basically the ruling was that it would be celebrated on the first Sunday following the first moon after the spring equinox. So again, the calendar's different, so they're celebrating it. They're sort of setting the standard differently as to when we celebrate that. It wasn't some insidious conspiracy or whatever, and frequently that does fall on Passover like it does this year. Passover is going on right now, and that's also when we're celebrating the death and resurrection of Christ. So that's sort of when that came about. That the meme that we shared earlier, almost every line of that is wrong. Talking when Constantine decided to Christianize this, Constantine converted, he made Christianity legal at the Edict of Milan. The empire wasn't really Christianized until almost half a century after he died. But that's kind of another point. So what they would refer to this as is Pesach. Is what they would pronounce that as, and that basically comes from the Hebrew word for Passover. Is sort of how that comes up. We've got another slide here because the different countries in Europe, as Christianity was spreading, would usually call it something similar to Pesach. Here, let me get this back on the screen here. So here we have, here's how the Romanians pronounced it. Here's how the French pronounced it. Here's how the Russians pronounced it, and it's all sort of variants of this word Pesach. That is again a Hebrew word. There's a Greek sort of transliteration that goes on there, and as language goes on, things kind of change a little bit here. Let me pull. No, that's not what I want. I want this. Okay, so the question is, where did the word Easter come from? So again, the first claim on the meme that we see there is that it came from the goddess Ishtar, which that's just an assertion that actually has negative basis. Like, that doesn't even fit, because where people were worshiping Ishtar was in the Middle East, and where this was sort of decided on when we would celebrate Pesach was in Rome. Yeah. So
it's a pretty big stretch.
Yeah, exactly. It's a stretch. There weren't, as far as we know, there was not any influence of those worshiping Ishtar at that time. That's not an argument. Like, it's not a viable argument. So another claim, and this one actually does have some credence as to where the term Easter came from, was the claim is basically that it came from the goddess worshipped by the Anglo-Saxons. The goddess was Istra, and this is where that came from. So now Istra, again, sort of the claim is that this was a goddess worshipped in April. Again, sort of a lot of these same things of fertility and sex and things like that. And just this rampant paganism. So then, again, when the Anglo-Saxons were Christianized, then they just sort of took the celebration that already existed and said, okay, well, yeah, you were celebrating Easter, now we're going to celebrate Jesus on this day. Which, you look like you're about to say something.
Oh, I was just gonna say though that would be just kind of a hard stretch, because the Anglo-Saxons wouldn't have been Christianized until nearly 400 years after Christians had already been celebrating Pesach.
Yeah, exactly. So this claim, just when you look at things on a sort of from a dates perspective, like it doesn't fit.
Yeah.
And there's people claiming that, that Easter was made up at the Council of Nicaea, but it's like, okay, they didn't even have the word Easter back then. Like that wasn't like you said, it was almost a half a millennia later that we even found out about the Anglo-Saxons and when they allegedly worshiped this god or this goddess Istra. So there's one of the problems with that. The other thing is we actually have little to almost no evidence that Istra was ever a god that was worshipped. So it's actually all of the evidence for this rides on one historian's conjecture. So basically what it is, let me see if I can pronounce the name right, is that he found that the Anglo-Saxons had a month. Where is that?
Easter Monath, I believe.
Yeah, that's it. Easter Monath. So he found out that they have a month called Easter Monath. So he is conjecting from that the months, as months were commonly named after gods, it was probably named after a god named Istra. Literally, that is the evidence, and this evidence only goes back to the 8th century. So this is not an incredibly old thing. This is really a relatively new thing when we're looking in the realm of church history. Now, it is very likely that there was probably, I would say that there was probably a goddess named Istra. I think that's a reasonable conjecture to make, but it's just there's not hard evidence for it. It's pretty scant.
So then, getting back to the original meme that has been going around as far as Ishtar, and the idea of the bunnies and the eggs and the child sacrifice and the blood, is there any validity in any of that?
In short, no. No, those are essentially made up. So again, dealing with Ishtar, the claim is that the eggs and the bunnies were all sort of fertility things that were wrapped up in Ishtar worship. There simply is not evidence for that. That's an assertion that's not backed up by anything. Ishtar symbols actually, on the contrary, seem to be a star, an 8-pointed star, a lion, and a gate. Tend to be the symbols that we see with Ishtar. So really nothing that resembles that at all. The whole idea of boiling eggs in the blood of infants. I mean, we know that ancient pagans did participate in child sacrifice and all sorts of wicked things. So it's like, okay, I wouldn't necessarily put it past them to do something like that. But the fact is, we don't actually have any evidence that they did that. And even if they did do that, we don't have any evidence that suggests that these things were somehow repurposed by Christians in order to sell Christianity. Just the evidence simply is not there. And sort of same thing like the Easter Bunny. Like when you look into the history of the Easter Bunny, that seems to not be any older than the 1700s or so. It actually comes from both Dutch and German sort of literature. Spring was when they would see the hares out, sort of boxing for the females. And see if I can pronounce this right, Osterhaus, which is was a sort of a folklore bunny that came about. We know him as Peter Cottontail today. Yes. And it was just sort of almost like if you've seen our other videos on these sort of pagan holidays, it's kind of a similar thing with St. Nicholas, where you have sort of this character that is just people, artists or authors or whoever take different spins on him, and then this spin goes to another culture, that culture makes their spin on him. So you have something that's changing all the time. It's the same thing with the Easter Bunny. We don't have any evidence that that links Easter bunnies with pagan sacrifice or anything like that. It just seems to be based in folklore, and again, this doesn't go back any further, at least based on the research that we've done, than the 1700s. So really just a few hundred years ago.
So I think one of the things that we have to think about is, we have, as Christians, we should be seekers of the truth. And we should always be promoting truth because truth is found in Jesus. So with that being said, how does all this nonsense come about? How do all these memes come about? And as Christians, how do we, not get deceived by those, because as a lot of people know, there's a lot of fake news out there.
No doubt. So in terms of where did it come from, best I can tell, this stuff basically came from like just new atheist propaganda, essentially, which is really ironic. Like I think one of the first big organizations that published it was the I don't remember which atheist group it was, but it was basically like the foundation for reason and science and things like that. And it's really ironic that people who claim to be all about the evidence and knowing the truth, many of who deny the historicity of Jesus, which is widely attested. We have something like 12 different independent sources that all attest to facts about Jesus. And you have people that are actually going out there and denying this, but then they're going to turn around and promote these ideas that, like we've said, are honestly complete conjecture, no historicity whatsoever. But it seems like for some reason, so we have sort of these new atheists that are kind of pumping out this ridiculous information, kind of same thing with like the Jesus Horus things. And we've talked about that in some of the other videos that we've done. But then it seems like there's almost like this group of Christian truthers that are then trying to
grab a hold of it.
And it's very strange because you have people promoting this just nonsense information, and then you have, these Christian truthers who are kind of latching onto this and sort of pumping it out. I think it's kind of sad and ridiculous. So I would say the antidote to that is just doing your homework. And obviously, that's one of the reasons we do videos and stuff like this. Just because we have done the research on this type of thing.
And I think it's unfortunate that the church a lot of times comes down to foolish debate and get into arguments about these things. But it's something that, Paul especially wrote about in the letters as far as us to not get caught up in doing.
Right.
And what's interesting, especially this time of the year, is I look to, 1 Corinthians 15 in verse 14 when it says, and if Christ has not been raised, then our preaching is in vain and your faith is in vain. And so we think about the message of Easter that typical Christians in the church hold to, and that is the essence of our faith. The vast majority of churches are going to preach on the resurrection, and that's where our faith comes from. If it didn't happen, then everything else that we do is in vain. To have a foolish debate against it seems a little bit counterproductive as far as to the church as a whole. But as Christians, then how do we properly disagree with those that hold to views of, we shouldn't, celebrate these particular holidays? How do we adjust and be gracious to those that don't hold to our view?
Yeah, and I mean, the scripture has a lot to say about that. I think you've got the scripture here, but just where Paul's talking about, okay, there's going to be people that hold certain, holy days and dedicate them to the Lord and things like that. And he specifically tells us not to hinder people that do that. So if you're someone who is convicted that... I think when you study the evidence, I don't think you really will be convicted that there is that. But if you still have that conviction that, people have done that and you want to not celebrate Easter, which is we're not specifically told to celebrate in Scripture. We are told to celebrate the resurrection, but we're not specifically told to celebrate Easter. If you don't want to celebrate that in any other way, if you want to do the Passover,
sure,
that's fine. That's not something we should look down at each other for. And then I think the flip side goes true. If somebody does have the conviction to celebrate Easter, I mean, we definitely celebrate Easter. Again, it's not condemning our brothers for these things that we're told not to condemn people for. And I think was it Romans?
Yeah, it's Romans 14, which goes into more than as far as just a specific day. It talks about food and other things. But in Romans 14, starting at verse 5, it says, "One person esteems one day as better than another, while another esteems all days alike. Each one should be fully convinced in his own mind. The one who observes the day observes it in honor to the Lord." And so that's one of those things that if you're convicted not to celebrate a certain day because that's your personal conviction, but the other person is doing it to honor the Lord, don't hinder your brother's relationship with the Lord by cutting them down in it. And so that's where you may have that conviction, but God's always looking at the heart. And as brothers and sisters, we should look at our brother and sister's heart towards God as well.
Yeah, definitely. Somebody, I think, asked what the text in Corinthians that you read. That was Romans 14 that you just read, right?
That was Romans. Yeah, I think it was 1 Corinthians. Let's see here. Sorry.
One other thing that I accidentally skipped, too, was looking at the traditions of where did eggs come from and, decorating eggs and things like that. So very briefly, so we have talk in 330 AD, Athanasius talked about, he referenced a 40-day fast before celebrating Pesach.
Oh, yeah.
And sort of fasting from animal products, basically. So we have talk very early in church history about sort of refraining, which that kind of became Lent. And then this became a very common tradition by the Middle Ages. And what ended up happening is that, chickens don't stop producing eggs just because you're not eating eggs. So eventually they would get to the point where, the last week or so, they would hard boil the eggs for preservation. And then we have, starting in about the 13th century, we see the decorating of eggs kind of becoming a pastime. So really that just became a thing based on fasting before Pesach was essentially where that came from.
Indeed.
Okay,
yeah,
cool.
It was 1
And you
Corinthians
posted
15:14 for anyone that was interested. I just posted that in there. So, all right. Do we have anything else we wanted to
Cool.
hit on?
Were there any other big questions we needed to hit? Okay. Awesome. Sweet.
Well, it was a short and sweet
It
video
was.
tonight, and we hope you guys all enjoyed it. So
Yeah, and stay tuned. So, all right, so some cool stuff. This is probably going to be our last video that we're doing in John's beautiful kitchen,
Yes.
as we are in the process of building a dope studio for doing this.
Super dope.
And then we got some exciting stuff next month. We are going to be interviewing and hanging out with Ivy Connerly, the rapper. If you guys are not familiar with him, check out his stuff.
Without a doubt.
He's an awesome rapper. Very just glorifying Christ while spitting bars. It's good stuff. It's good stuff. So we got a lot of good stuff going on in the near future. We are still doing one of our next couple videos is going to be sort of on like tools of the occult and things like that. Our last video was on demons and demonology. But anyway, stay tuned. We love you guys. Thank you guys for watching this. If you're watching this on YouTube, check out the Reasons for Jesus Facebook group.
Without a doubt.
If you're watching on Facebook, be sure to check us out on YouTube. We are YouTube/Worldview Warriors. But on that note, grace and peace. We love you guys. Have a good night.